Abortions, I've had a few,
Right.
but then again, I can't remember exactly how many.
What, really?
I can't remember, yeah. I think maybe like, I want to say 5, 4 or 5.
Yeah, I've had about 5 too.
Just when you've thought you've seen it all, the most unhinged feminist podcast on the internet decides to go viral. We're going to break this down and so much more on today's episode of the Barad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where we take on the craziest ideas from across the internet, our media, and our politics, all from an independent perspective. Up first, guys, I had never heard of any of these people or this podcast, but I had the misfortune to be acquainted with it because of a clip that's going viral right now, so you have to suffer through it as well with me, because that's what we do here on the show. I'm a little sick like that. So this is an actress and singer named Lily Allen, who I wasn't familiar with, but apparently is a C-list celebrity of some note, on the Miss Me podcast on BBC Sounds. This is an official BBC production over in the UK, and she and her co-host are going viral right now because of one of the saddest and most unhinged 60-second clips of video I've seen in a long time, and that's saying something. We're going to take a listen to this. It touches on abortion and reveals something really sad and kind of sick that I actually think transcends the debate over the legality of abortion and is much bigger than that. Let's take a listen to this.
I can't remember. I just remember I have an IUD now. I think I'm on my 3rd, maybe 4th. And I just remember before that was a complete disaster area. Like, I was just, I'd get pregnant all the time. All the time.
You fertile like me in those days.
Oh, yeah.
Because, I said today to someone, I was like, I actually don't know if Lily's had an abortion. I didn't know. Okay, God. See, why didn't we talk about that?
Abortions, I've had a few,
Right.
but then again, I can't remember exactly how many.
What, really?
Yeah.
Why didn't this come up in last week's episode where we were just talking about abortions?
Because I was just letting you run with it.
Reveal everything.
I can't remember, yeah. I think maybe like, I want to say 5, 4 or 5.
Yeah, I've had about 5 too. Lily, I'm so happy I can say that and you can say it and no one came to shoot us down.
No judgment.
No judgment. We've had about the same amount of abortions. So
I remember once getting pregnant and the man paying for my abortion and me thinking it was so romantic.
I actually think that is romantic. Do you not think that's romantic? Whoops. Am I an idiot?
What? Getting rid of the problem.
No, but like...
Let me take care of it.
So I've seen that clip 3 or 4 times now, because I watch things, obviously, when I'm preparing the show. I'm still not over it, how sad it is. A lot of people are responding by ridiculing this woman, Lily Allen, who says she does not know how many abortions she has had. I'm not going to ridicule her because it gives trauma to me, actually. She seems traumatized by this, but not even aware of how deeply she's been traumatized by this. Because to not remember such significant occasions in your life is a sign of trauma. It's not normal that you would not remember how many abortions you've had. That's a unique experience, right? It's something in your memory that would stand out. This is not like, how many times have I been to the dentist in my life? That's not the question here. That's not the equation. So I can remember really important things in my life, even though I have a very poor memory overall. And my heart breaks for her in a sense. In another sense, I think the messaging here is incredibly toxic, very, very, very irresponsible to do with your platform. And I actually think this conversation exists independently of the debate over the legality of abortion, because I have people I know, love, and respect who come down on either side of that issue. Some who are pro-choice, some who are pro-life. My personal views are somewhere in the middle. I can understand both perspectives. What I cannot and have never been able to understand, though, is the glib, callous, and celebratory way that some, not all, but some high-profile pro-choice, pro-abortion activists, like this celebrity, speak about abortion because I think it totally betrays the severity, the emotional and moral gravity of the act, even if you think it should be preserved as a legal option. And I can understand why people hold that belief. I can't understand why anybody would ever view abortion as something cute or fun or as a form of, basically as a form of birth control. I mean, obviously, I'll never be in this situation, but I can intellectually comprehend how somebody could end up inadvertently pregnant once or maybe even twice. 5 times? What? 5 times, and you didn't pursue more serious or more consistent forms of birth control. Something there is not clocking. Something there is not adding up. And I actually think this kind of thing, if you are somebody deeply invested in preserving legal access to abortion, this kind of thing should actually horrify you, because I have a hard time imagining a worse way to advocate or defend or support abortion access than this. I have a hard time imagining a way that's more off-putting to normal people, that's more outrageous and scandalous and comes off as more heartless and ghoulish than this. It's really, really shocking stuff. And when she says, no judgment, at some point we need to do some judgment. You know, I think society for a long time was far too judgmental, stigmatized far too many things, shamed and bullied people. But like anything, the difference between an antidote and a poison is the dosage, right? The difference between a medicine and a poison is a dosage. You can't have zero shame in a society. You can't have zero judgment. And if you're getting 5 abortions and laughing about it, if you're getting so many abortions you can't even remember how many you've had, you're going to be judged for that. And I think you probably should be. Now, we should have compassion as well, because like I said, this person gives off traumatized to me. But that is not something society should just like uplift and accept as wonderful and positive. And what's so fascinating to me about this is that even the viewership of a BBC feminism podcast, which, newsflash, is going to be left-wing, is going to be pro-choice, was absolutely not having it in the comments. We're going to go over some of those comments after this. Guys, I've had threats sent to my home before, so I understand better than anyone how important it is to get your personal information off the internet. That's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, Aura. If you've ever wondered how spammers get your phone number or why your email inbox is flooded with spam, well, here's why. There are companies called data brokers that sell your data. They do it without your consent, and they make millions selling it to marketers, scammers, and even stalkers. And while they're legally required to move your information if you ask, they make the process confusing and hard on purpose. That's why I recommend today's sponsor, Aura, to my family and friends. They take care of the hard part, automatically removing your information from all of these sites and keeping it off. I use Aura to get my address taken off the internet so it's harder for haters to harass me and to decrease the endless robocalls and spam emails. And you can too. Plus, if anything does happen, Aura includes $5 million in identity theft insurance protection, and they have US fraud experts ready to help 24/7. Try Aura for 14 days for free at aura.com/Polumbo. In those 2 weeks, you'll discover where your data is being sold. I'm not leaving myself vulnerable, and you shouldn't either. Remember, guys, to subscribe if you haven't yet. Hit that like button while you're at it. And remember that you can listen to the Brad vs. Everyone podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts if you want to take this conversation with you on the go. If you don't have a chance to sit down and watch my beautiful face, we're available on audio podcasts as well. Now, I want to read some of the comments on this because I thought this was really interesting how even on this BBC feminism podcast, they were simply not having it. One person wrote, "This conversation is helping the anti-abortion movement in so many ways." Yeah, I agree. If you wanted a better advertisement for like a pro-life movement, I mean, they'll probably clip this up and put it in their TV commercials. So you're just gifting your opponents content with this kind of extremism. Another person wrote, I had an abortion when I was 18, and it still haunts me, and I live with guilt every day. I certainly couldn't make light of it. Well, my heart goes out to this woman and to others like her. I mean, whether you believe it should be legal or not, an abortion is something that has a profound effect on a lot of women, and it should not be treated lightly. It should be a decision treated with the utmost gravity, because some women are traumatized by it, have regret, and at the very least, I would implore people to not just casually use it as a form of birth control, for goodness sake. Another person says, I'm pro-choice, but I'm revolted by this. It's one thing to need one, it's another to do it this way and brag about it no less. Utterly vile. Another one wrote, I find this conversation incredibly insensitive. I'm very much pro-choice, but I'm genuinely shocked by what was said. I can understand an unplanned pregnancy happening once, maybe even twice. But to have 10 abortions collectively, geez Louise, and then joke about it feels deeply irresponsible and selfish. There are women who are longing for children, and yet they're making light of the situation. Why not use protection if you knew you didn't want children? Another person says, I'm 100% for a woman's right to abortion, but treating it like a joke is sick. There is a thing called contraception. Their comments are disgusting and make a mockery of people who've had no choice or who cannot get pregnant. What a sad pair. It really is interesting how many of the commentators made it extremely clear that they were pro-choice, but were horrified by these comments, and I appreciate that. Another person said, disgusting, being so casual about the subject. Of course, women should have choice over their bodies and not feel shame, but equally, I don't feel abortion is something to muck around with and just make a joke of. We're still talking about creating the beginnings of a life and then the ending of it. So surely it should be a last resort. I was struck by that as well. Like, we are so far, culturally and politically, from the days of safe, legal, and rare, that I just find it astounding, because that's the pro-choice position that I can understand. I know a lot of people who hold, and we could debate the ethics and morality of it, and I acknowledge it's extremely complex, but at least that I can wrap my head around. I cannot wrap my head around the depravity in this clip. Another person wrote, I'm pro-choice and feel women have the right to have abortions, but the way you two are handling the subject matter gives into the pro-life dumpster fire of examples they love to use for smear campaigns. You two sound so ignorant, callous, and too immature to discuss this topic. Should have kept this amongst yourselves. Another person wrote, absolutely disgusting and shameful. Abortion was never meant to be used as birth control. I am pro-choice, but if this becomes the norm, I'm changing to pro-life. Grow up and be responsible. Yeah, I mean, that's it. There's just a complete lack of personal responsibility here. And it is disturbing. I watched coverage of this on Piers Morgan, and the left-wing panelists were defending this and saying this is fine and this is good. Abortion is just healthcare and we should want people to have more healthcare. I'm just mortified by all of this. I'm also mortified by the fact that this is a official BBC podcast. I mean, the Brits in my audience can correct me if I'm wrong, but pretty sure they have to fund that with their tax dollars. And I certainly wouldn't want my tax dollars to fund this kind of callous celebration of abortion. And just the general toxicity of this podcast. I'd never heard of it before today, but listen to this other clip, because when I see a little viral snippet like this, and I saw it first on X, I usually try to go and watch the full episode to make sure I'm not missing context or anything. So I actually watched the full podcast this is a part of, this 30-second clip that was going viral on Twitter. And I mean, it was more of the same, but it definitely wasn't taken out of context. And there was also other stuff in it like this that was really disturbing to me. Take a listen.
Like, men are trash.
I wonder why it's never come up that the man should be in charge of this.
Excuse the pun.
And put it on them. Yeah. Okay. Men are trash.
Yeah, that's just lovely. Just casually hating entire groups of people. And I don't really think they're joking. I'm not one to get offended over jokes, but it wasn't giving joke to me. So I would not be thrilled as a male UK taxpayer if I was funding podcasts for people to cheer double-digit abortions and castigate and condemn half the population by virtue of their biology. But everything is fine. This is fine. Society and culture is doing amazing. Okay, guys, up next, we're going to talk about some really horrifying rhetoric I've seen that strikes me as nothing more than utter gaslighting and emotional manipulation. Major Democratic figures have claimed that the Republican Big Beautiful Bill, which I've criticized, I'm not a fan of the bill. I think it will add a lot to the debt. There's a lot of crap in there. But because it makes some reforms to Medicaid, people are going on television and claiming with their whole chest that by modestly trimming Medicaid growth in spending around the edges, Republicans are going to kill hundreds of thousands of people. Seriously, that is the claim. Take a listen to this from Lawrence Summers, the former Obama administration Treasury Secretary and a Democratic economist on ABC News. Take a listen to this.
This now from former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, also the former president of Harvard University. Larry, thank you for joining us this morning. In the New York Times this week, you and Robert Rubin, who also served as Treasury Secretary, called this bill dangerous, said it poses huge risks to the economy. What are those risks?
George, just to start with, what your people have been describing is the biggest cut in the American safety net in history. The Yale Budget Lab estimates that it will kill, over 10 years, 100,000 people. That is 2,000 days of death like we've seen in Texas this weekend. In my 70 years, I've never been as embarrassed for my country on July 4th.
Wow. That is an extreme statement, and I was instantly horrified and intrigued. So I wanted to know where this number came from, how did they reach this result, and is this really true? Spoiler alert, it's not, and we're going to break it down. But just first, one note. To talk about the Texas floods and invoke that when you're talking about public policy debates over federal legislation, is something about that is kind of callous to me and kind of gross. Like little girls being drowned, and you're going to conflate that with modest Medicaid cuts in a reconciliation package in Congress. I just maybe don't do that. It feels like politicizing a tragedy in a really unfair and nasty way to me. So I wasn't a fan of that, but I do take Larry Summers seriously somewhat. I mean, he, during the Biden administration, criticized a fair amount of the Biden legislation and made some warnings about inflation that turned out to be true. So I was like, whoa, is this real? Is this really a thing? Is this bill going to result in 100,000 people dying? So I did some research. I spoke to some experts, and I found the underlying analysis this is based on, which is a Washington Post article by a Yale lawyer that claims 100,000 people will die because of the Medicaid cuts. I mean, in the long term, Medicaid spending is still only going to go up, but they're cuts compared to the baseline. And when you look into it, this number collapses, and it becomes apparent that there's no real truth to this claim at all. We're going to walk through that, and how it's just, even to the extent there is some truth to it, it's incredibly deceptive framing. So let's walk through it. So first things first, the way they reached this claim, the Yale experts in their analysis, was that they took the number of people that the Congressional Budget Office, the nonpartisan CBO, which I do respect and is not, despite what some Republicans say, is not like a woke lib run factory or anything like that, but I mean, they're making very rough estimates. Their track record is mixed on predicting things. And anyway, they estimated that earlier versions of this bill, the Big Beautiful Bill, would result in about 11 million people losing coverage, healthcare coverage under Medicaid, the government program for health insurance, taxpayer-funded health insurance. It was supposed to be for disabled and low-income people, but now has kind of morphed into something much bigger. Anyway, they come up with this 11 million number. So what these Yale analysts did is they took that 11 million number, then they took some studies that suggest a correlation between Medicaid access and mortality rates, and then they did the math, taking that correlation and extrapolating it based on that 11 million number to come up with these figures that Larry Summers then not exactly accurately cites, but do suggest that tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people will die because of these cuts. There are two key problems with the analysis. The first one is that 11 million figure itself is almost certainly totally wrong. So if the input number is incorrect, then the whole analysis becomes kind of worthless. So why do I say that 11 million number is totally wrong? There are two main reasons here. One is that the CBO, while they are, like I said, an institution I respect, is very bad at projecting how policy changes will affect healthcare coverage. So, for example, when the Republicans changed a piece of Obamacare that imposed a financial penalty on people who did not purchase health insurance, the CBO's estimate of how many people would lose coverage compared to the reality was about 10 to 20 times too high, depending on the way you look at the numbers. It was wildly off. So they vastly overestimate how many people will lose coverage. At least in very recent history, they have done so. So it's pretty suspect. Then, when you look at that 11 million number, several pieces of it aren't even relevant anymore. So I used for this analysis data and expert insight from the Paragon Health Institute, which is a more free market-oriented healthcare policy think tank. And they have a breakdown of this 11 million, or it's really 10.8 million. Who is this that would lose their Medicaid coverage? So 1.4 million is illegal immigrants who, as they report, some states have chosen to voluntarily provide taxpayer-funded healthcare for millions of unauthorized immigrants, often with federal funding obtained through money laundering schemes. However, cuts to these provisions did not make it into the final bill. So, first off, it's kind of crazy that illegal immigrants are ever receiving any form of taxpayer-funded healthcare. And the logic of Larry Summers and the Democrats who are peddling this talking point would suggest that if you support removing illegal immigrant beneficiaries of taxpayer-funded healthcare programs, you're committing thousands of murders. That's what their logic would suggest, which clearly something has to be wrong with that. Otherwise, we are committing murder by not providing the entire world with free taxpayer healthcare every day. So, but the more important thing is that provision didn't even make it into the final bill. So already that 11 million, subtract 1.4 million. Already huge numbers difference there. Then, who is the rest of this 10.8 million that we're talking about here? Well, 4.8 million are people who won't meet modest community engagement requirements, or what's being called work requirements. In reality, people are being asked that if they're going to receive taxpayer-funded healthcare, they have to either volunteer or work 80 hours a month, 20 hours a week. And volunteer, and of course, this does not apply to disabled people, does not apply to elderly people, does not apply to children, but for able-bodied adults, they have to fill out some basic paperwork showing that they are working or volunteering or in some way contributing to the community. It's estimated that 5 million people or so will lose coverage because they can't or won't satisfy those requirements in the basic paperwork to show them. So I'm left wondering, are we murdering these people by telling them that they can continue to receive healthcare paid for by their neighbors, but they simply have to give back to the community in some way and fill out some paperwork? And then they are unwilling or unable to do that, and then they lose coverage. Are we murdering them? I don't think we are murdering them, actually. I think that if they choose or for some unknown reason are unable to fill out basic forms to not get coverage, and then something bad happens because they don't have healthcare coverage, that is unfortunate, but I do not feel that I have murdered them because of that. You let me know if you disagree. And the other thing here is that millions of the people who will lose coverage under these reforms, the reason they'll lose coverage is because they are literally ineligible for the programs they are currently enrolled in, but that just hasn't been enforced. So Paragon estimates that about 1.6 million people on Medicaid are just not eligible for Medicaid, and there are about 3.1 million people who are improperly enrolled in the Obamacare exchanges that would be affected by the big beautiful bill. So you've got nearly another 5 million people who will lose coverage because under the law as it is written, they're not supposed to be receiving that coverage. Maybe their income is much higher than the cutoff that's supposed to be. Are we killing them by not giving them coverage they're not supposed to get under the program and how it's written and who it's supposed to be for? I don't really think so. And all these people who lose coverage, many of them will get insurance coverage somewhere else through an employer. They will purchase it on the Obamacare exchanges or another access to another program. So you can see that the base input of this analysis is highly suspect, this 11 million figure. And so if that's wrong, then the whole estimates are wrong. However, there's another layer to it. The second piece of that equation, 11 million times the reduction in mortality associated with expanding healthcare access in terms of insurance, that figure that they use is also deeply flawed and suspect. I will link to the full research and breakdown from the Paragon Institute in the description if you're interested in the details of this. But in short, the people at Yale who came up with this analysis used a very high-end estimate from studies that suggest a reduction in mortality from expanding insurance coverage. The actual totality of the research is much more mixed on this, and there's actually a lot of research suggesting no clear causal or correlation between expanding insurance access and reducing mortality. Reading from Paragon here, a thorough review of studies claiming that health insurance improved health outcomes found that most did not establish a causal relationship. Nearly all were observational studies that are prone to bias and confounding by unobserved factors. They did not adequately address the heterogeneity of health insurance that observed differences in health outcomes may have resulted from unobserved differences between the insured and the uninsured. Insurance increased medical care consumption and modestly improved self-reported health, but outside of a few vulnerable population subgroups, for example, children, there is little evidence that insurance significantly improves the health of most people. A 20-year observational study attempted to counteract the deficiencies of earlier short-term observational studies by using a more complete set of covariates to adjust for the differences between insured and uninsured individuals. It found that insured people use more healthcare services, but there was no significant effect of insurance on health and mortality. A study with 16 years of follow-up by Richard Cronick, a former Obama administration official who worked on ACA implementation, found that after adjusting for high-risk characteristics, being uninsured was not associated with an increased risk of mortality. He concluded that there actually wouldn't be much change in the number of deaths in the United States as a result of universal health insurance coverage. Now, I can't say that I'm 100% confident in these studies or this analysis either. It's very murky, but the research is all over the place when it comes to what exactly is the relationship between health insurance coverage and mortality. It's obviously an important financial tool, but how much does it actually reduce the rate at which people die, being uninsured versus insured, is unclear. Yet they took, for this Yale analysis, some unreliable high-end estimates and then just extrapolated it to this 11 million figure that is not a real or meaningful figure. And then they produce this huge figure of how many people will die, supposedly, that is then parroted by Democrats and by media figures and used to essentially emotionally gaslight us and manipulate us into never cutting anything ever, or people will die. We heard this with Trump's first term tax cuts. Major Democratic officials claimed that people will die. They say this every single time, and it's not fair because, at some point, we are so many trillions of dollars in debt, and these programs are so unsustainable that real harsh cuts will have to happen, and then whatever effect there is will be a lot more severe. So I wish we could have an honest conversation weighing the pros and cons of these kinds of policies. And I'm not telling you there's no trade-offs. I'm not telling you no one will be harmed by these reductions or anything of the sort. But what I am telling you is that when you hear these alarmist, apocalyptic numbers and rhetoric, often beneath the surface, if you look just a little bit beneath the surface, it becomes clear how many logical leaps and massive extrapolations and stretches and deceptive distortions are behind those claims. Because they're not really meant to inform, they're meant to emotionally blackmail us into never cutting anything ever, because people will literally die if we do. What do you guys think? Have you seen this kind of alarmist rhetoric? Was my analysis or breakdown here helpful to you? Please do let me know in the comments. All right, guys, that'll be it for this episode of the Brad versus Everyone podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please do make sure to subscribe if you aren't yet. Do hit that like button before you go. And with that, we'll talk again real soon.
I will watch your